Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. Coming Together. Episode 4. Chapter 23 to 27. 23. We left Mina Lee there and climbed down the cliff. I got cell phone reception less than 20 feet from the base. I called Chief Carling, then my dad. My dad got there first, driving as close as he could get. Then he bundled Rafe, Kenji, and me into the jeep, where Mom waited, anxious and worried. Kenji was worried, too, whining and watching me, sticking so close she was practically on my lap in the back seat. Chief Carling arrived next with Dr. Inglis. They went up to look at the body, then came back and got our statements. Chief Carling couldn't tell us much. Dr. Inglis didn't know how Mina Lee died. I'm guessing that's because she'd been partly eaten, but of course no one was saying that. No one was saying much of anything to us or to each other. Dad took us back to the house after that. More people were there: the mayor, the principal, and some other members of the town council. They converged on my dad as we got out of the jeep. I slipped away. Rafe followed. We sneaked off to the forest's edge with Kenji. I was about to say something, when the roar of an engine cut me short. Daniel's truck whipped around the corner, spewing clods of dirt. He pulled in behind the others and was jumping out almost before the vehicle stopped. I walked toward him. Hey! He looked from me to Rafe and I braced, but he only nodded at Rafe. A brusque nod but not unfriendly. Corey called, he said as he strode over. He got the news from his mom. Are you okay? Shaken and spooked, but otherwise fine. I heard from Nicole, too, after her dad was called. She offered to catch a ride with her dad. He didn't finish, but I knew what he meant. Nicole had offered to come in his place and he'd told her no. Probably told her to stay home, too, figuring it'd be crowded and chaotic enough. Now he was asking if I'd rather he'd let her come. This is good, I said. Which was true. Corey said. Daniel's gaze shifted to Rafe and he lowered his voice. Can we talk for a second? I'll be over there, Rafe said, waving, before I could answer. Daniel gave him another nod, a little less curt this time. He steered me off to the side. Is it really Mina Lee? That's what Corey thought his mom said, but she had to take off, so he couldn't ask. It is. Are you sure? I nodded. The cougar. They usually leave the head alone. Oh, he said, like he'd just realized exactly what I'd seen. He stepped forward, arms going around me. I lingered there a moment, then backed away. I could see Rafe staring into the forest, giving us privacy to talk, but he looked like he expected to see a cougar at any moment. I guess that's why she wasn't answering her phone, I said. It may explain why her car was at the Braun place and she wasn't. I don't know if I should tell Chief Carling about that, to give her a better idea about time of death. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Just a section. I looked over at Rafe. He'd shoved his hands in his pocket, still watching the forest, clearly worried, fidgeting now. He glanced at his watch. Some place he needs to be. Daniel muttered. Actually, I think there is. Hold on. I walked to Rafe. You're worried about Annie? Kind of. Yeah. Go on. He looked at me. I didn't mean I want to. Yes, you do, and it's okay. I know Annie likes to walk in the woods, so right now, you're freaked out. With good cause. Go. I'll see you at school tomorrow. Thanks. He started moving away, then paused. Are we okay? He looked toward the adults, huddled near the house. I guess that's, the wrong thing to be thinking about under the circumstances. No, it's fine. We're good. I'll see you tomorrow. And I'll get your jacket from Chief Carling. I'd wash it for him, too, but I had a feeling I shouldn't mention that or he'd refuse. His hands brushed my waist. I'd kiss you goodbye, but considering your parents and Daniel are watching. Tomorrow. A crooked smile. Then he took off, walking at first, breaking into a jog when he thought no one could see him. Supportive guy, Daniel said, walking up behind me. He's worried about his sister. She goes for walks in the forest and they can't afford a phone. I insisted he go. Oh. He looked in the direction Rafe had gone. I could give him a lift. He's fine. About Mina, should we mention the calls? I say yes. If they find her cell phone, they'll see I called and wonder why I didn't tell them. I'm going to give them the card, too. I won't bring up the library or the visit. But if they ask point blank, I'm going to tell the truth. Can you leave out the part about visiting the old woman? He nodded. I'll just say I found the book and basically got the same message. That's only if they ask, though. I don't want them, he made a face, then shrugged. You don't want them thinking we took her message seriously enough to follow up on it. Because you don't want them thinking we'd betray the town to a corporate spy. A half shrug this time, which meant that was only part of the reason. Serena, then, I said, lowering my voice even more. You're thinking about the drugs they gave her before she died. If those drugs had anything to do with Serena's death, you don't want them suspecting that's why we wanted to talk to Mina Lee. He nodded as my dad and Chief Carling came toward us. The chief asked where Rafe was. When I explained, I think he jumped a notch in Dad's estimation, same as he had in Daniel's. Next I got grilled. This time, the subject wasn't the victim but the killer. Or the supposed killer. I don't think I stopped myself, knowing my argument would be stronger without using his pet name. I don't think the cougar did it. I lifted my hands as my dad opened his mouth. I know it doesn't matter, Dad. Whether he killed her or scavenged her remains, he's a man-eater now, so he can't stay. I just don't want to jump to the conclusion he's the killer and overlook the possibility she was. Daniel's arm nudged mine. A subtle gesture that could be accidental, but when you've been friends this long, you know when you're being told to shut up. Killed another way, I continued. Maybe a fall. Or a hunter's bullet. Well, that's the good thing about having the best doctors around, Chief Carling said. They'll find out what killed Ms. Lee, no matter what the condition of. She coughed and hurried on. My guess is you're not far off saying a fall. The way she was tramping around these woods? I don't think she'd ever been out of the city in her life. Lots of cliffs and ravines to stumble in around here. Mom bustled me and Daniel into the house. Even if I couldn't stomach the thought of food, she wanted me to have something. So the three of us sat at the table, and ate toast and drank tea and talked about everything we could think of that had nothing to do with cougars and reporters. Another rough night. My roller coaster of a day all jumbled together in dreams and nightmares. Rafe kissing me. Rafe kissing Haley. Rafe laughing. Marv snarling. The climb. The run. The body. The body should have taken center stage. It didn't. Instead, it was the run that played through every scene, like a thread tying it all together. Running with Kenji, laughing, my hair flying. Then running with Rafe, grinning, my heart pounding. Then running from Rafe, giddy, my pulse racing. Then running with a cougar, seeing it out of the corner of my eye, keeping pace, and feeling, not fear but something incredible, like all the other runs rolled together, exhilaration and excitement and a weird kind of peace. When I was running with Rafe, we found ourselves at the cache and I could see Mina Lee, her eyes wide, face streaked with blood, and I could smell that blood, and it didn't smell bad. It smelled. I jerked awake. Sweat rolled off me. My bed was soaked with it, my camisole pasted to my chest. I went to the balcony door and threw it open. Cool night air washed over me, but it wasn't enough. My chest ached and before I knew it, I was on the balcony, leaning over the railing as far as I dared and breathing. Just breathing. MRRR up. I jumped at the sound, as familiar as it was. I glanced over to see Fitz stretching on the railing. "How did you get up here?" I said. A baleful look, like he was offended that I'd ask. "I'm not carrying you down," I said. "You're here until morning." He lay down on the wooden rail, as if in answer. I patted him, then headed back inside. As I climbed into bed, I could see him, sitting now, a gargoyle watch cat. Yellow eyes peering into the night. I smiled, pulled up the sweat-damp covers, and fell back to sleep. I woke up in a weird mood. A good mood, which was the weird part, all things considered. After I finished feeding the animals, Mom offered me another get-out-of-school-free card. I refused it. I needed to talk to Daniel about Mina's and Serena's deaths, and school was the best place for that. I was getting my lunch ready. Mom had gone into the studio, leaving Dad on watch our child for signs of an imminent breakdown duty, sitting at the table, sipping his coffee. "You really like that boy," he said. "Raphael." "Sure. I like him." A pause, as if that wasn't the answer he wanted. "I thought you didn't date boys from school." I shrugged. "There's always a first time." More silence. I glanced over to see him studying me. I sighed and turned to him, peanut butter covered knife in hand. "If you've heard something about him, just spit it out." He sipped his coffee, debating, then said, "They say he's something of a Romeo." "Romeo?" I sputtered a laugh. "Seriously? You know what I mean, Maya. He likes girls. Which, all things considered, is good." He gave me a look, and I sighed. "Okay. You mean he's a player?" I'd point out that doesn't make him a Romeo, which would imply he sets his sights on one and sticks to her, till an early death do them part. But I get it. And you're right. He likes girls. That doesn't bother you?" I shrugged. If he had a reputation for sleeping around, I'd steer clear. He doesn't. He likes to catch and release. I get that, which is why I'm being careful not to expect too much. He took another slow sip of his coffee, which meant more was coming. I licked the peanut butter off the knife as I waited for it. "No one in town really knows this boy, Maya. He showed up with his sister, and moved into a cabin that doesn't even have electricity. People have been concerned about them, but he's made it very clear that he doesn't want anyone's help. It bothers some people, the way they just appeared." My eyes rounded. "You're right. Do you remember the night they arrived? That big flying saucer hovering over the park?" He shook his head and pushed his chair back. "I know you're serious, Dad, but I'm okay." "Really? I understand you might want to start dating more seriously, and that means dating someone from town. But if you're going to do that, This time he took a long drink of coffee, and the mug was still at his lips when he said, "I like Daniel. He takes care of you." I blinked. "Oh my God! Did you really just say that?" "He takes care of me." Dad flushed. "I didn't mean it like. Takes care of me? Did I go to sleep and wake up in the 19th century?" I looked down at my jeans and t-shirt. Ack! I can't go to school like this. Where's my corset? My bonnet? Dad sighed as Mom walked in with her empty teacup. "What did I miss?" she said. "Dad's trying to marry me off to Daniel." I looked at him. "You know, if you offer him a new truck for a dowry, he might go for it." "Apparently, I said the wrong thing," Dad told Mom. "Again. Never hard with our daughter." She walked over and slid my sandwich into a bag. "Leave your father alone and get going before you miss your ride." "They're still looking for next of kin," Daniel said as I climbed into the truck. "But they found her cell phone, so I'm glad I came clean on that." I nodded. "Last night, when I was about to raise the possibility she was murdered, you stopped me. Was it because of Serena and the meds? Because the medication caused her death and Mina found out, so the St. Clouds killed her?" "No. That'd be crazy. But all it takes is one person to be a little crazy, decide the research has to be protected at all costs, decide to take matters into his own hands." We drove along in thoughtful silence before Daniel said, "So I might not be completely nuts." "Not yet. I think we need to break into the Braun place tonight. They won't clear it out until her next of kin shows up, and it sounds like that won't be anytime soon. It'll be our last chance to find out if she knew anything about Serena's death." 24. We decided to visit the Braun place after dark. As we reached town, the truck bounced from the dirt road to the pavement, and something underneath made an ugly cracking sound. "It's been doing that," Daniel said. "Just ignore it. Corey says he'll take a look on the weekend." "Well, no matter how dire the situation, if my dad offers you a new truck, don't do it. There's a serious string attached." "Hey," he said. I told him what my dad had said. That got him laughing, and as we pulled into the school parking lot, even the sight of Rafe waiting for me only made him roll his eyes. We got out. I glanced at Daniel. He sighed. "Go on. You sound like you're giving a 5-year-old permission to play with an unsuitable friend. If the shoe fits." I flipped him off. "Watch it or I won't marry you," he said. "Truck or no truck?" I laughed and jogged over to Rafe. "Did he just say?" Rafe began. "Yes. And don't ask." "How's Annie?" "She's fine," he said as we walked along the forest's edge, skirting school property. "I tried to convince her to stay indoors for a few days. She doesn't get it. A couple of years ago, she was the one always telling me. Well, you know. I didn't have any experience with brothers or sisters, but I suppose it would be as if Daniel got into an accident and stopped watching out for me. It'd be like losing the Daniel I knew. If you can't get her to stay out of the woods, I've got something that should help. A present from my dad." I swung my backpack off my shoulder and rummaged. "One for you and one for Annie. He makes me carry it all the time. You guys should, too." He took the cans of pepper spray. "Good idea. Thank him for me." "I will. If you need to use it, aim for the face, not just the eyes but the nose." "Oh, here," and my dad threw in a pamphlet on animal encounters, even though I told him you seem to know how to handle yourself in the woods. "Make lots of noise so you don't surprise them. Make more noise if you meet one." Try to be as big and intimidating as possible. Don't drop eye contact. Don't turn away. You got it. As we walked, he'd been looking around. I asked what he was looking for. Someplace private, he said. So we can talk more? That's so sweet. He laughed. Talking's good, but the bell's going to ring. Not much time for deep conversation. Not much time for anything else, either. A wicked grin. There's enough. He scanned the building and the forest. I knew he'd never officially dated any of the girls at school, but I'd figured that didn't mean he hadn't slipped off to a quiet spot with one. Obviously not. There's a nook around back, I said. It's an emergency exit, so no one ever uses it. I thought you didn't date guys from school. Doesn't mean I don't know the make-out spots. Make out? I thought we were talking. But if you insist. I tugged him into the nook, wrapped my hand around the front of his shirt, pulled him to me, and kissed him. He chuckled, the vibration buzzing through our kiss. I'm bold, but I'd never been this bold. With Rafe, I could be. He liked bold. If his return kiss was any indication, he liked it a whole lot. We kissed until the bell rang, then he pulled back but only to glower in the direction of the bell. I laughed. He stayed put, hands resting on my hips. You're okay, then, he said. After last night. Better than I should be. What do you mean? I shrugged. I feel like I'm holding up too well. I mean, I feel awful about it, but I'm not having any trouble coping. Because you're tough. It feels insensitive. He shook his head, fingers sliding into my belt loops, leaning toward me until we were eye to eye. I was there last night, Maya. What I saw was strength. You were upset, but you knew what had to be done and you did it. I was impressed. Seriously impressed. He kissed me again and my arms went around his neck and I didn't care about the bell, didn't care if I ever got to class. A throat clearing behind Rafe made us both jump. I believe that was the bell, Raphael. I couldn't see the speaker but recognized the voice as Miss Tate's, the primary grades teacher. Whoops, he said. Guess we'd better get inside, then. When Miss Tate saw me, she gave a little oh of surprise. Maya. Sorry, I said. We were just going in. I could feel her gaze on my back as we walked away. When we got around the corner, Rafe whispered, I think she's disappointed in you. She'll get over it. He grinned and we headed inside. If I'd felt insensitive earlier, it wasn't long before I was feeling downright callous. Everyone kept telling me they'd heard what had happened and how horrible it must have been. But inside, I was still buzzing, my pulse racing, as giddy as the time Serena and I sneaked champagne at her cousin's wedding. Rafe didn't make it easy, either. During first period, he found an excuse to walk past my desk and drop off a note. It read, not dating classmates means you've missed out on an important part of 5th grade. Time to catch up. Below that, he'd drawn a heart with our initials in it. I'd laughed, added 2b plus 2 together equals forever and passed it back. And so it went, all morning, the page getting filled up with doodles as it went back and forth. It was completely 5th grade and completely silly and I loved it, because he wasn't afraid to be silly. It was like kissing him first. I could do whatever I wanted, and not have to worry what he'd think of me. 5 minutes before lunch, he dropped off another note marked open at the bell, then excused himself to use the washroom, and didn't return. When the bell went, I unfolded it to find a rough sketch of the school, with a dotted line from our class to an X by the principal's office. I stuffed the note in my pocket and took off. At the office, I found an X in marker on the floor beside the trash can. I moved it and found another note. Another dotted line, this one leading outside to another X. That one ended just inside the forest, where I found a third note under a pebble. It was blank. I looked up. Rafe's laugh floated down from the trees. Can't fool you, hey. I scaled the tree. When I reached his branch, he was sitting there, legs dangling. Will that branch hold too? I said, looking at it. Maybe. The question is whether you're willing to risk it. I swung onto the branch and started sidling out. He grinned. Dumb question, wasn't it? It was. You can't resist me. No, I can't resist a dare. I stopped. He looked at the distance between us and lifted his brows. This seems close enough, I said. For safety's sake. Safe from the branch breaking? Or from me? He swung his leg over and reached for me, pulling me into a kiss. He started slow, shifting, checking my balance. I backed up a little and swung my leg over, so we were both straddling. Better. I said. Much. He gave me a real kiss then, deep and hungry, and I think the branch could have snapped and I wouldn't have noticed until I hit the ground. Maybe not even then. We kissed, barely coming up for air, until a giggle sounded below us. Then a sing-song voice. Rafe and Maya sitting in a tree, kissing. Annie, Rafe peered down at his sister, beaming up at us. I thought I asked you to stay inside today. I was careful. She grabbed the lowest branch and swung up. I wanted to see Maya. I wanted to make sure she was coming over for dinner. I haven't invited her yet. Annie grabbed our branch. Whoa, no. Rafe said as it dipped. She can't come over if she falls and breaks both her legs. She won't do that, silly. She'll land on her feet. Just like me. Rather not test that theory, he said and leaned over me to unwrap her fingers from the branch. I slid down onto the one below us. That's cheating, Annie said. This is how you do it. She crouched and jumped. My heart rammed into my throat, but she hit the ground as easily as if it had been 2 feet down instead of 10. I flashed back to the night of my party, when I'd leaped off the roof, Rafe following. Rafe swung onto the branch beside me. Ignore her. She's showing off 10 years of gymnastics. We climbed the rest of the way down as Annie bounced on the ground, impatient. So, are you coming over, Maya? Rafe has something he wants to tell you. She grinned. A secret. Does he? Rafe shot Annie a look, then glanced at me. He waved Annie aside. We just need to talk, he said in a low voice, once she'd stepped away. Are you in trouble? I said. No, nothing like that. Well, I'm not sure about tonight. Daniel and I had to check the Braun place before it was cleared out. I have that English essay that I've barely started. Can you get an extension? After finding that body, I'm sure they'd understand. I really need to talk to you. How about now? He shook his head. It's not that kind of talk. I looked into his eyes. They were clouded with worry and something almost like fear. You're freaking me out here, I said. What's up? Nothing. Sorry. Go have your lunch. I'm going to take Annie home. I probably won't be back, but I'll meet you in the square after school and walk you to the cabin. You shouldn't be in the woods alone. I could have said the same for him, and this struck me as odd, coming from a guy who hadn't tried to shield me from stuff because I was a girl. I agreed, and he made me promise to wait at the town square until he arrived. I made him slip back into school and get that pepper spray. I waited with Annie until he came back, then went to find Daniel and the others. If the morning had sped by, the afternoon slogged. When it finally ended, I told Daniel I'd catch up with him after having dinner at Rafe's. Then I took off for the town square. Rafe wasn't there. I perched on the base of the monument, a bronze life-size figure of a guy in a lab coat. It isn't marked with a plaque, and we tell people it's to honor all scientists. I've heard, though, that it's supposed to be some guy named Samuel Lyle. I looked him up once on the internet, but couldn't find any mention of him. I'd been there about 10 minutes when a guy strolled my way. A stranger with dark blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and the vague-eyed look of a drug addict. I could see the top of a badly done tattoo on his collarbone, the rest hidden under a golf shirt buttoned all the way up. A windbreaker topped the golf shirt. He wore white sneakers and jeans that looked like they'd been bought this morning. As he approached me, he smiled, and if he'd brushed his teeth in the last year, I'd be shocked. I could smell his windbreaker, that stink of new plastic. Smelled his breath, too, as soon as he opened his mouth. "Hey there, miss," he said, stumbling over the miss a little. "I'm looking for someone, and I was told you could help." One look at the guy, and I knew exactly who he was looking for. I glanced to the side, toward the forest, the path I knew Rafe would take. It was empty. "Good. I will if I can," I said, giving my best tourist-friendly smile. "Who is it?" "Kid named Rafael Santiago." "No, Martinez. Rafe Martinez. He's about your age and I just talked to someone who said you're his girlfriend." I managed a laugh. "I wouldn't go that far, but sure, I know him." "You're a friend?" "I am. From way back. Lost track of him when he came up to Canada. Then I was in Vancouver, visiting a buddy, and he said, 'Hey, you know who's over on the island?' Course, I couldn't go home without saying hi to my old pal. He's been tougher to find than I thought, though." He laughed. "This town was tougher to find than I thought. Wasn't even on the map. Then I get here and find out he's living with his sister in some cabin in the woods. Out there." He waved north. "Seems there isn't even a road to follow. I was hoping you could take me to him." "I would, but I've never been there myself. I'm waiting for my dad to pick me." I took out my cell, as if it had been vibrating, and answered. "Dad. Where are you?" I paused, then sighed. "Fine, I'll walk home then." I hung up and slid off the monument. Seems I'm not getting a lift and my mom needs me home right away. "Why don't you try Chief Carling's office? They can give you directions to Rafe's place." There was no way this guy was going to the police station, and the look on his face confirmed it. "All right then," he said. "I'll keep asking. Thanks for your help." He couldn't resist a sarcastic twist on the last word. I hoisted my backpack and headed out. 25. Rafe had lied. He was in trouble. He should have warned me. Now I needed to warn him. Luckily, he was more than a few minutes late. With the guy hanging around, I couldn't head straight for the path leading to Rafe's place. Still, I needed to go in that direction, so I could watch for him. I circled out of the thug's sight, then veered back toward the path, picking up my speed until I was safely in the forest. When there was still no sign of Rafe, I started worrying that he'd taken another route. I wasn't even completely sure that mine was the right one, because I rarely went out to the Skylark cabin. It was a 20-minute walk from school, and in the opposite direction from the park. It was thick forest here, the evergreens so close together they were as bare as telephone poles, trunks soaring into the air, finding sunlight and sprouting branches only near their tops. When the weather wasn't so dry, the ground was boggy. It had to be the crappiest piece of land in the area, which is why Ed Skylark picked it. Skylark had been an antisocial old hermit who'd lived here before the St. Clouds bought the land. Everyone else had happily taken the generous packages the St. Clouds offered. Ed Skylark had set up traps around his cabin and told the town that if any local kids stumbled over them, it wasn't his fault, he was just trying to catch mink and martins. We didn't know for sure if there actually were traps, but we'd grown up giving the cabin a wide berth. No one had been surprised when heirs didn't show up to claim his estate or when 5 years later the pair who did were very distant, very young relatives. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if Rafe and Annie were related to Ed Skylark at all, or had been in one of the nearby towns, heard about the abandoned cabin, and declared themselves heirs. It wasn't like anyone was going to challenge them for custody of the place. I was thinking about that when a branch cracked beside me. I wheeled and peered into the forest. This deep in, the forest was as dim as twilight. Once my eyes adjusted, I could make out a pale white sneaker peeking from behind a tree. Rafe had white sneakers. So did the guy looking for him. I took out my pepper spray. Then I backed up, hoping to get a look at a jacket or pants or anything that would tell me it was Rafe goofing around. But as I moved, so did the other guy, circling the tree to keep out of sight. I fingered the pepper spray. If it was Rafe, then I could say he deserved it for sneaking up when he knew I'd be on high alert for cougars. Still, a blast of pepper wasn't something to take lightly. If that's you, get out here before I call my dad and tell him I've found Marv. No answer. I adjusted my grip on the can, fingers clammy now. I kept moving backward, not taking my eyes off that tree. I thought about calling for help. But no one could make it here in time, and if I was wrong, I'd only get Rafe in trouble, maybe even alert the guy looking for him. I gripped the pepper spray, took a deep breath, and started toward the tree. Okay, I said, raising my voice. Hide and seek is not a game to play in the forest. If a hunter's around. The guy lunged at me, and I sprayed him. He howled in pain, yelling, "You!" I ran. He was able to follow, meaning he'd only caught a spritz of pepper. I picked up speed. This was a race I knew I could win. My strength and my territory. I'd easily outpace. "Stop!" he yelled. When I kept going, a bullet whizzed past. I said stop, or next time I won't miss. I dove for the ground. He fired. The bullet hit a tree, splinters raining into my hair. I heard him curse as he tromped through the undergrowth. I crept along the ground, and when he came around a nearby tree, I could see him, his eyes streaming tears. He peered into the forest and swore again. I tugged out my cell phone and opened it. "No service. Please no. Not now." I held the phone at every angle and at arm's length. Nothing. The guy kept stumbling around, clearly having no idea how to move in a forest. I crept on my belly toward him, ready to leap up and blast him again. Then I stopped. He had a gun. This was the time to run, not fight. I rose onto all fours and crawled away from him, sweeping aside dried sticks and dead leaves and anything else that might crackle. As I moved, I kept looking up into the trees. I couldn't help it. My gut instinct didn't just say to run, it said where to run. Up. That was nuts. In the time it took me to find a suitable tree, he could shoot me. I fought the impulse and concentrated on moving slowly and quietly. "Do you really think you can get away?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the forest. "I've got a gun, you. It's a half-mile back to town. You'll never make it." I could do a half-mile. Inch by inch if I had to. I continued forward without pause, until I reached a dry creek bed full of dead vegetation. No way I was getting through that without making a racket. "I'm not after you, kid," the guy yelled. "Just tell me what I want to know and you're free to go." I started along the creek bank. When it threatened to take me too close to the guy thundering through the woods, I stopped and looked around. A fallen tree crossed the stream bed. Staying in the long grass, I crawled to it, got my balance and a hand clamped over my mouth, yanking me back as I started to tumble. My fists flew at my attacker, but he held me tight, pulling me against him, one hand over my mouth, the other around my waist. "Shhh. It's me." I twisted to see Rafe. He motioned for silence, then let me go. "I heard a shot," he whispered, checking me over. "What's going on? Who is that? You forgot to mention that the guys you robbed tracked you down." "What?" He blinked in genuine surprise. "Is your real name Rafe Santiago?" "No, but it's one of the aliases my mom used." "Aliases?" the guy yelled again. "That's a limited time offer, kid. The longer you take to come out, the more you're going to. You have 2 minutes. Starting now." Rafe took a deep breath. "I'll handle this. Get back to town." "Where's Annie?" "She took off an hour ago. That's why I'm late." For a guy who worried about his sister so much, he didn't seem to keep a very close eye on her. Soon, this guy was going to tire of looking for me and continue down the path, hoping it led him to their cabin. If Annie was there, she wouldn't know enough to run. "Distract him," I whispered. "I'll get help." I started to crawl away. Rafe grabbed my leg. "If the town finds out about Annie, we'll have to leave." He met my gaze. "I don't want to leave." "Do you want to die?" He didn't answer, just put his hand against the back of my head and pulled me into a kiss that made my head swim. Rough and deep and desperate. He wouldn't look at me after that, just turned his gaze forward and said, "Get help. I'll distract him." I took off crawling. I'd gone about 20 feet when the guy yelled, "Fine. You don't want to help me? I'll find Rafe myself, and when I'm done with him, I'm coming back for you. No one disrespects me like that, especially not a little." He let loose a string of racial epithets, which I'm sure he thought would wound me to the core or at least piss me off enough to give myself away. I kept crawling. "You looking for me?" Rafe yelled. The woods went silent. I held still. "Raphael," the guy called after a moment. "That's me." "And who are you?" I rose, staying hunched over, and moved as fast as I dared toward the path. "You don't know me," the guy called, "but I've been paid to bring you back to the Jacksons." Rafe laughed. "Bring me back?" "Right. You think I'm going to kill you?" "Oh, no. The Jacksons want to do that themselves, sending a message to every other punk who tries to rip them off. The only question, Raphael, is whether you come along willingly or you make me go after your girlfriend and your sister first. The Jacksons don't want them." He let out a nasty laugh. "But I think I could find some use for them. And if I turn myself in, you'll leave them alone." Rafe's voice had moved farther in the opposite direction, drawing the guy away from me. "That's the plan." The guy didn't seem to be following Rafe, but that was fine. He'd made contact with his target. I was safe. I reached the path end. A bullet flew over my head. I ran. Maya! Rafe shouted. A sharp pain in my hip made me stumble and I went down. My hip felt like it was on fire. There was a scorched track through my jeans, the skin below it grazed and burned. I looked up to see the guy bearing down on me, gun pointed. Stay down, or... I rolled into the undergrowth. He fired. Missed. Fired again. In the distance, I could hear Rafe shouting as his footsteps pounded the path. Another shot. Then a click and a grunt. I peered through the brush to see him trying to unjam the gun. I steadied my breathing, then scrambled along the ground until I was a few feet from him. I leaped up and blasted him full in the face with pepper spray. He screamed and tried to fire, but the gun was still jammed, and I was already diving away. He fell back, fumbling with the gun as tears streamed down his face. I ran toward him and grabbed the gun. I didn't get a good enough grip on it, and when he let go, it sailed into the forest. The guy grabbed me by the arm. I wrenched free and tore off. He tried to follow, stumbling blindly after me. Rafe was no longer shouting, just running full out in our direction. His face was taut with anger, and when I heard the growl, I thought it came from him. Then a tawny blur charged through the trees, snarling and snapping. It was the cougar from the night of my party, the female. She planted herself between me and the guy, who'd stopped swiping at his eyes and now stared at her like he was sure he was seeing wrong. The cat crouched. Rafe skidded to a halt. No, he said sharply. The cat kept snarling, crouched, and ready to spring. We're okay, Rafe said, his voice firm. I'm okay. Maya's okay. I looked at him. His gaze was fixed on the cat. He was talking to the cat. I took a slow step, sidling toward the gun. I kept my gaze on the cougar, and when I moved, I could see her left flank and the mark their dark fur in the shape of a paw print. I swallowed. I knew what I was looking at. I knew what it meant. But I couldn't let the thought form. Not now. Rafe was still talking, sharper now, telling the cat we were okay. She crouched, hindquarters shifting, the tip of her tail twitching. No, Rafe said, jumping forward. Don't. The cat leaped just as the guy wheeled to run. He managed to dodge her, stumbling slightly as she brushed him. Rafe took off after the cat, yelling, but she tore after the guy. I followed. The guy ran full out, knowing he was running for his life, but the cat was faster. As the gap between them narrowed, the cat hunkered down for a flying leap. Rafe shouted something I couldn't quite make out. Or maybe I could, I just wasn't ready to believe what I was hearing. Just before the cat leaped, the guy's arms windmilled, legs buckling as he skidded to a stop right at the edge of the ridge we'd climbed the afternoon before. He turned, hands going up, and shouted okay. Okay, as the cat crouched, tail flicking, amber eyes fixed on him. Call it off, the guy yelled as Rafe raced toward them. Call that thing off and I'll go away, okay? I never found you, okay? Just call. The cat jumped. Rafe shouted and this time I heard exactly what he said. Annie. The cat hit the guy, and they flew over the cliff. Rafe kept shouting her name, running toward them so fast I thought he was going to fall, too, and I lunged, screaming, but he stopped right at the edge. I raced up beside him. Below, the cat lay on the guy, who was sprawled on the grass, his eyes open. Open and unseeing. The cat lifted her head and whined. We started climbing down. At first, the cat just lay there, whimpering. When she tried to rise, she stumbled onto 3 legs, her left front one dangling. "Stay there," Rafe yelled down. "Don't move. Just stay there." The cat made a noise low in her throat and looked up at us. I looked into her eyes and I knew what I saw. Who I saw. "Annie," I whispered. Rafe looked over her sharply. He tried to make eye contact, but I turned back to the ridge. Blood pounded through my veins so hard it hurt. "Annie." The cougar below was Annie. As crazy as it sounded, I never once thought, but that's impossible. Because I knew it was true. I saw that dark patch on her haunch and I knew when she was human, there'd be a birthmark in the same place. I knew what it meant for her. And I knew what it meant for me. Yinald Lushii. Skinwalker. 26. When I reached the bottom, I knelt beside the fallen guy. I checked for a pulse, but his staring eyes told me he was dead. I thought of Mina Lee. Eaten by a cougar. Possibly killed by a cougar. I glanced over at Annie, then tore my gaze away. I couldn't think about that now. I couldn't think about a lot of things now. Rafe noticed the hole in my jeans and realized I'd been shot. It was only a graze. Slap on a bandage and I'd be fine. He crouched beside the cat as he checked her injuries, and if there was any doubt that it was Annie, it disappeared as I watched her letting him touch her hurt foreleg, only whimpering when he brushed a sore spot. I crouched beside them, and she stretched her head back and nudged me, giving a chirp of greeting, eyes closing as she rubbed her head against me. "Is it broken?" Rafe asked me. I ran my fingers along her leg. "It doesn't seem to be," I said. "I think it's just a sprain. It should be wrapped, though." "Can she?" I swallowed. "Can she shift back to human?" "She will, but it's not really." He paused. "It isn't under her control. She just will." He looked at me. "I know you have a lot of questions. All of which can wait. Give me your jacket. I'll wrap her leg and see if she can stand on it." He stripped out of his denim jacket. Underneath he was wearing the same sleeveless tank top he'd had on Saturday. When he twisted, once again I saw the dark edge of what I'd presumed was another tattoo. I remembered yesterday, when he hadn't wanted to take off his shirt to wrap the arm. I caught the armhole of his shirt and pulled it away before he could stop me. There, below his shoulder, was a paw print birthmark. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at that mark until he tugged the fabric from my fingers. "Maya." I turned back to Annie. "Hold her still. This will hurt." He leaned down, trying to catch my gaze. "Maya." "Hold her," I snapped. "We need to get her to safety and take care of." I glanced at the dead guy and couldn't bring myself to finish, so I just looked over at Rafe and said, "I'm guessing you don't want to take this to Chief Carling." He shook his head. "I can't." "Then we have work to do." I didn't need to splint Annie's foreleg. I'd just set to work when she started her shift back, and I don't know what I expected, a screaming, tortured transformation, I guess, but instead she started to twitch and quiver and whimper, and Rafe told me to get back, then she was human again. It only took a couple of minutes as she morphed in a process that looked more like something from a sci-fi movie than a horror flick. It took a lot out of her, though, and she lay there, curled up in a ball, gasping and panting, naked and covered with sweat. Then she sat up, looked around, saw me, and crawled over. She curled up, half in my lap, like a scared child, shivering, her heart pounding, snuggling against me for warmth. After a moment's hesitation, I hugged her and told her it would be okay as Rafe draped his jacket over her. Within minutes, she was asleep. We need to. I glanced at the dead guy. Move him. My second body in as many days. I should be horrified. At least with Mina Lee, I'd felt a hint of grief. Even then, though, my response had felt wrong. Cold. Now it was even worse. I felt nothing. This guy had come for Rafe, and he'd been willing to kill me to get him. He'd died by accident. If he'd had his way, he'd have done a lot worse to us. Still, to feel nothing didn't seem right. Too sensible, even for me. I know a place, I said after thinking for a moment. I carefully slid from under Annie, lowering her to the ground and adjusting the jacket over her. I stood and looked down at the body. Is anyone going to come looking for him? Rafe shook his head. The Jacksons must have put out a bounty on me. He wanted to collect it himself, which means he wouldn't risk telling anyone else where he was going. He stepped toward me, fingers closing around my arm. I'm sorry, Maya. I never would have gotten you involved. I pulled from his grasp. Don't lie to me. Not now. That's why you're here. To get me involved. Not in this. I motioned to the dead guy, but this. I tugged my shirt away from my jeans, showing off the top of my matching mark, and as I did, I watched his expression, praying for a look of surprise and knowing I wouldn't get one. I didn't. That's what you wanted, isn't it? You said you were looking for something special in a girl, and that's what it was. I didn't say the words. Even thinking them made my gut clench, made me want to run as far from him as I could get, but I couldn't do that. I needed answers. I can explain, he said. I expect you to, I said. But first, we have to get rid of him. We carried the body to a narrow cave farther down the ridge, where erosion had eaten away at the cliffside. We took his ID. He didn't have keys, so he must have hitched a ride. We put him in the cave, then stuffed the opening with rocks and branches, to keep scavengers away. By the time we got back to Annie, she was awake again and ready to walk to the cabin. She was still exhausted, though, barely saying a word, leaning against her brother. When we got there, it was exactly as I remembered it, the kind of place so run down that hikers would use it for shelter in bad weather, presuming no one lived there. The cabin was barely larger than my bedroom and had an outhouse. A new generator supplied electricity and a propane stove provided heat for cooking. As rustic as you could get. Clean, though, I saw as I followed Rafe inside. Probably a lot cleaner than it had been when Ed Skylark lived here. There were 2 beds, little more than bunks. One was original. The other was made of new wood, as was the table and 2 chairs. Add a tiny fridge, and that was it for furnishings. The bed linens and plates and other stuff all looked new but were discount store quality. Clearly Rafe was making the drug dealer's money last as long as he could. Rafe helped Annie to the new bed, which was piled with colorful pillows and blankets. She snuggled in, saying something about being hungry, but she drifted off to sleep again before she could finish. Rafe got a health bar from a crate of groceries and a juice box from the fridge, and left them beside her bed. Then he motioned me outside. He didn't say another word until we were standing beside the fire pit, and even then he only said, "So," before lapsing into silence. I lowered myself onto the log they'd been using for a fireside chair. He sat and tried sliding closer, but when I tensed, he stopped and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the forest. "You said your mother was Hopi," I said, pointing to the tattoo on his forearm. He rubbed it and nodded. "They have the Skinwalker stories, too, don't they?" He looked over sharply, blinking. Yes, I know the legend, I said. But I'm guessing it's more than a legend. It is. His hand came down right beside my leg, not touching. He looked down at his hand, like he was hoping I'd slide closer, give him some sign everything was okay. When I didn't, he said, "This isn't how I imagined it." Telling you? Did you imagine telling me at all? His gaze shot to mine. Yes. That's why I asked you to come out here tonight. I knew I couldn't wait. Shouldn't wait. Things were happening, and you needed to know the truth, if you didn't already. Okay, so you were going to tell me tonight. Well, it's tonight. Go on. He squirmed and I knew the timing didn't matter. He'd expected this to play out differently, probably on a cliff top after a climb, sitting together, his arm around me, as he casually said, "Hey, you know how those mountain lions have been hanging around you a lot lately? Well, there's a reason." "Skinwalkers?" I prompted. "Right." Silence. "I've only read one reference to them turning into cougars," I said. "It's usually wolves, coyotes, even bears. It's there, if you dig deep enough. That's what my mom said, anyway." He cleared his throat and sat up straighter. "What you read that was about witches, right? Cast curses? Wear animal skins and change form. Right. Well, that's not us. Mom said we probably shouldn't even call ourselves skinwalkers, because of the confusion, but we had the name first. Real skinwalkers, like us, go back to before Columbus discovered America. It's a kind of supernatural race. We're born into a family of skinwalkers. We can change into mountain lions. We get our energy from nature. We have healing powers and some control over animals." He met my gaze. "Sound familiar?" He reached over to put a hand on my arm, and I realized I was covered in goosebumps. I pulled away. "Go on." He hesitated, then continued. "Mom was told the new kind of skinwalkers started out as assistants to the real ones, who were tribal healers and protectors. Our kind. Well, it's a long story and I'm sure you're not that interested yet. I can give the history lesson another time. Point is that we aren't the skinwalkers they believe in these days. Our kind went extinct. Annie doesn't look extinct to me." That's because he stopped, wincing, then stretched out his legs and rubbed his calves. "You okay? Muscle pains? I'm getting them a lot lately. I think it's close. The first shift. Are you?" He exhaled. "Later, right? Keep explaining." "Okay. Skinwalker families lost their powers. Mom said it was a survival mechanism. They were being killed off by the new human kind of skinwalkers, and so all of a sudden, they started having kids without powers. Those kids weren't a threat, so the others left them alone." "Right. But some families still passed along the old stories. Like Mom's. It was like telling your kids that your family used to be famous warriors. It didn't mean anything anymore, but it was cool. Then these people got in touch with her. People from other skinwalker families. They said scientists had figured out a way to reactivate the gene. Reactivate a skinwalker's powers." "Right. Why?" He shrugged. "If we don't have them, we feel it. Mom said it's like being born a blind artist or a deaf musician. There's this drive. This itch you can't scratch. There were people in her family who went crazy, and everyone said that was the reason. She worked her frustration out in art, but she said it was never enough. Something was always missing. So they reactivated the gene. For you and Annie. And others. Like me. He nodded. Annie was the first. When everything seemed to go fine with her, they did a full first wave of trials. They were in it together, our mothers. Of course, they worried about what might go wrong. Whether they'd done the right thing. They started getting paranoid. Then one of the mothers said she'd overheard the scientists talking about taking the babies away after they were born. So they ran. All of them. Another nod. They split up because they thought that would make them harder to find. Later, Mom started thinking they'd overreacted. The woman who said she overheard the scientists had already wanted to leave. So maybe she made the story up. If they all went together, any efforts to find them would be split. It made it easier for her to get away. Right. But when people talk about taking kids away from their parents, he shrugged. It brings up bad memories. Residential schools, he meant. I didn't know a lot about it in the United States, but I knew it was a big issue in Canada, where, for over 100 years, Native kids were taken from their families to live in state-funded, church-run schools. From inside the cabin, Annie yelled, "Rafe! Right here," he called back. He got to his feet, then turned to me. "Hold on. I'll be right back." 27. There wasn't an accident with Annie, was there? I said when he came back. It's not brain damage. Not really. No, he stared at the cabin, looking so sad that I had to resist the urge not to slide closer. It started soon after she began shifting. Just small things at first. Not interested in her art anymore, not interested in school, getting restless, wandering off and staying away until she was hungry. I figured it was just a combination of the shifts and our mom's death. But it wasn't. He shook his head. It kept getting worse. She's not Annie anymore. I mean, she is, in some ways, but she's simpler. More animal than human. He nodded. She still takes care of me, but in a different way, protecting me, like with that guy today. But now I'm the parent. I make sure we have clothes and food and a place to live. I'm not complaining, she did it for years, and it's time I took some responsibility. But you want your sister back? You think she'd want to be back? I know she would. I mean, if that happened to me. If it happened to you. My heart started thudding so hard I struggled to breathe. Shifting into animal form, running and experiencing life as a cougar, that part sounded amazing. But truly becoming an animal, giving up all my dreams, my future? I felt sick just thinking about it. She's getting worse, he said in a low voice. She shifts more and more. One day, maybe she won't shift back. But that's not normal, right? Obviously skinwalkers were still human. Something went wrong with the experiment. That's why you're here. You came looking for another subject, hoping to find leads to the group that did this, to see if they can fix her. He nodded. When Mom found out about the cancer, she started searching for the other subjects. She contacted someone who really didn't want to tell her anything but finally said he knew where one girl was. You. Here. When Mom was dying, she said if anything went wrong, to come here and look for you. She knew the name of the town and what your mom looked like, but that's all I had. Only my mom is my adopted mother. So you started going through all the girls, trying to find the one with the birthmark. If you were looking for a native girl, though, kind of obvious, wasn't it? I wasn't. Your mom's white. What? That's what my mom said. It's how your mom's family hid. Intermarriage. She had native blood, but she looked Caucasian, hazel eyes and light hair. And my dad? I don't know. It was all in vitro fertilization. My guess was that the sperm donors carried the gene, too. That would make sense, if you were trying to resuscitate a genetic trait. My dad must have been full native, then. Not that it mattered now. Well, it did matter. I was half white. Or close to it. For genetic shocks, that didn't quite match finding out I could change into a cougar, but it was close. I felt a weird squeezing panic in my chest, like waking up one day and looking in the mirror to see a stranger. So you figured I wasn't the girl you were looking for. You gave it a shot, but half-hearted, just in case. It wasn't like. You thought it was Haley, didn't you? Hazel eyes, blonde hair, right age. Kind of. But not really. He exhaled, gaze dropping to his hands, folded in front of him. Haley liked me. Enough to tell me anything I wanted without asking why I wanted to know it. She was on the swim team, and she'd have seen just about every girl here in a swimsuit. She could tell you if anyone had a birthmark. She's seen mine, but she didn't mention it. No, and I got the feeling she wouldn't even if you had one. So he had to see for himself. That was why he'd wanted to go swimming yesterday. To confirm his suspicion. He continued, I thought maybe it was Sam. Haley wouldn't have noticed if she had a birthmark. Mom wasn't completely sure that you'd be here with your mother. She knew she'd given up one of her twins. Twins? A boy and a girl. Multiple births are common with skin, he trailed off. You really didn't know, then? That I'm a skinwalker? That my mother is white? That I have a twin brother? No, apparently there's a lot about myself I didn't know. I'm not doing this right. He slid closer, arm going behind me, but I jumped away so fast I almost fell off the log. Just tell me the rest, I said. My mom knew that yours gave up one of her kids to make them both harder to find. The scientists would be looking for twins. When she heard that you surfaced up here, she presumed you were the one. Your mom. He looked over, like he'd just realized he was telling me that my mother chose to keep one of her children, and it wasn't me. Go on. He swore and shifted position, giving me a look like he wanted to make this easier. So you figured it was Sam, I said. She came here alone, so that fit, too. Only she didn't want anything to do with you, meaning there was no way you were getting close enough to check for a birthmark. No way I wanted to either, he muttered. I asked her out. She said no. When I tried taking the slow route, getting to know her, she told me to take a hike, and when I didn't, she went after Annie. What? Annie came by to get a look at her. Like with you, because I thought she was the one. Sam wanted her to tell me to back off. Annie laughed. Sam was about to take a swing at her when I got there. She stopped and she said she wasn't going to hit Annie. Doesn't matter. It completely freaked Annie out. She could tell Annie was slow. It was like kicking a puppy that wants to play. Sure, Sam was quick with her fists, but she was never cruel. My guess was that she'd just raised her hand in anger. An instinctive reaction with Sam. Yet she'd had a few run-ins with other girls at school. Was I defending her because she was nice enough to me? I said, and that's when the cougars started taking an interest in me and you realized you'd been chasing the wrong girl. He nodded, calm, like he had no idea what he was admitting. I continued. But I'd already made it clear I wasn't impressed by the bad boy routine, so you had to figure out what would impress me. Honesty. Let me see past the bad boy front and make me feel special, as if you liked me so much you'd let down your guard for me. I wanted him to say no, I was wrong, that wasn't how it happened at all. He didn't even try. I supposed, when this was over, I'd be grateful for that. But right now, it hurt. Hurt so bad. After everything I'd just found out, you'd think this wouldn't matter, but the rest of it was too hard to wrap my head around. I needed time for it to sink in. This sunk in. Like a dagger. So I guess you found what you were looking for, I said. The girl you were looking for. My words twisted with a bitterness I wished I could suck back in, and his lips parted in a curse, as if he'd just realized what he'd admitted. It isn't like that. Yes, it is. You chased me for the same reason you chased all the rest. You thought I was the one. You chased me harder because you were pretty sure I was. That's why you came to my party. That's why you took me up on the roof. It was you who dosed my drink, wasn't it? Hoping I might be willing to shed some clothing, so you could look for a birthmark. No. I did not drug you, Maya. Yes, that's why I hit on you. That's why I hit on every girl. But you were different. Because I was the one. I got to my feet. I don't know anything about my mother or skinwalkers or scientists. But if everything else you said is true and I have no reason to think it isn't, then I need to find these answers as much as you do. So I'll help you. Right now, though, I need to go home. Maya. He took my arm. I shook him off. I need to go home, okay? I have a lot to think about. We'll talk tomorrow. I walked away. He didn't try to stop me. My relationship with Rafe was a lie. He'd chased me for a reason. He'd kissed me for a reason. Even when I'd looked into his eyes and thought I'd seen something special, it was there for a reason. He'd tricked me. Lied to me. And the worst of it? I'd seen it coming. I'd watched him go after half the girls at school. I'd rolled my eyes and said I couldn't believe they fell for it. When he made a run at me, I shot him down and I was so pleased with myself. I could see through the guy when no one else could. Yeah, right. Sure, I'd fended off his interest easily, because he wasn't all that interested at the time. Once he decided I might be who he was looking for, all he had to do was change tactics and I fell harder than any other girl. Still, I'd suspected that he had a goal I couldn't see. But I didn't care. I didn't want it to be true, so I told myself it wasn't. As much as I hated Rafe at that moment, the person I was most upset with was myself. As I trudged through the forest, I wallowed in that pain because it kept the rest at bay. Focus on the guy who played me for a fool, and I didn't need to think about being a skinwalker, having a twin brother, having a white mother who chose my brother over me. I didn't need to think about Annie, about becoming like Annie. Nope, just concentrate on the jerk that I'd really liked. Much easier that way. For now, at least. I realized that my hip hurt a little, but when I stopped for a better look, the bullet graze was already scabbing over. Already healing. I shivered. As I tugged my shirt down to cover the hole in my jeans, I thought about getting shot, which made me think about the dead guy. If being a skinwalker explained my healing powers, did it also explain my reaction to his death? And Mina's? I'd met Mina, so I felt sparks of pity. The other guy, though, had been a threat, so I felt nothing. Reacting as an animal would. Like a predator would. I shivered again. When my cell phone blipped, telling me I had a text message. I almost didn't answer. It wasn't Rafe, he didn't have a cell. But there wasn't anyone else I particularly cared to speak to. I wasn't even sure what I'd do when I got home. Tell my parents I'd eaten dinner at Rafe's? Pretend everything was okay? Or walk in and say, "Hey, remember what that old woman at the tattoo studio said?" Well, it turns out she wasn't crazy after all. No, I wasn't saying anything to my parents. At least not until I was sure Rafe was telling the truth. In my gut, I knew he was. But informing my parents that I was, apparently, a member of a formerly extinct race of supernatural beings? Not until I knew more. When I did check my phone and saw the text came from Daniel, my gut plummeted. I was supposed to meet him tonight. But how could I act like everything was okay? Keeping a secret from him was even worse than keeping one from my parents. Harder. I checked his message. "Come over whenever you're done with dinner. My dad's not home yet." As I read it, I realized I did want to go over. See Daniel. Tell Daniel. Get advice from someone I could trust, really trust. I texted back saying I hadn't stayed for dinner, so I had to grab something to eat. "Come anyway," he texted back. "I'll make spaghetti." 28. 20 minutes later, I turned the corner to see Mr. Bianchi's car in the drive and knew there wouldn't be any spaghetti tonight. Cooking any of Daniel's mom's Italian recipes was forbidden when his dad was home. I was about to text to ask if he still wanted me to come over, when I saw him, out back in the boxing ring he'd made with Corey years ago. I crept up behind him. I was good at that. Some of my friends joked it was my native blood. But it wasn't, was it? Quiet as a cat. The guys had made log benches for spectators, back when they were 12, and had visions of every girl in class lining those benches, swooning as they showed off in the ring. Never quite worked out that way. If there were spectators, they were more likely to be heckling than swooning, but the memory made me smile as I lowered myself quietly onto the bench behind Daniel. He was shadowboxing, throwing punches, and dodging an imaginary opponent. He was dressed in his usual gear, sweatpants and a tank top, both emblazoned with the school logo. I sat there and watched him, muscles flexing, sweat dripping from his dark blonde hair, spraying with every swing, the silence punctuated by soft grunts when a blow seemed right and frustrated snorts when it didn't. As I watched him, I started to relax. This was familiar. The sight, the sounds, the feel of the bench under my fingers, even the faint smell of perspiration, it was familiar and it was real, and it made the last few hours drift away, wisps of a nightmare disconnected from reality. Finally, he sensed me there and danced in a circle, fists falling to his sides, feet still moving. His face lit up in a grin so big it chased away the last of my worries. "I'm guessing spaghetti is off the menu," I said, nodding toward the house. "Yeah. We're going out instead." My treat. I didn't want to go out, but I would. Right now, I just wanted to be with him. He looked over at me. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Liar. "Is it Rafe?" When I hesitated, his hands clenched, jaw clenching with them. "This is the part where you get to say I told you so." He swore and came over to sit beside me. "What happened?" He meant with Rafe, but I didn't want to tell him about Rafe. Instead, I thought of everything Rafe told me, everything I desperately needed to share. But I couldn't see any way to start. So I settled for, it just didn't work out. Big shock, I'm sure. He wasn't who you thought he was. True, yet not in the way Daniel meant. Rafe really was the person I'd seen the other night on the roof, a decent guy thrown into a hellish situation, forced to grow up fast, be strong, take responsibility. Even now, as much as I despised being part of his solution, I understood why he'd had to find me, whatever it took. He wasn't a bad person. He wasn't even someone I could hate. That made it all the harder. You liked him, Daniel said softly. I forced a smile. Fell for the wrong guy. Every girl has to do it once in her life. At least it was a quick lesson. I got to my feet. I could really use that dinner. He plucked the front of his sweat-soaked shirt. I should have a shower and change. Guess I wasn't thinking this through too well. He glanced toward the house, and I knew he wasn't eager to go in. For the same reason he'd been out here boxing. You'll dry, I said. And if the smell doesn't fade, I'll just sit at another table. Now come on before I starve. We started circling wide around the house, heading for the road. The blender was only a 10-minute walk, so we didn't have to bother with the truck. We made it about 10 steps before the front door banged open and his dad yelled, "Where do you think you're going?" Daniel hunched his shoulders, as if against a blast of icy wind and mumbled, "Just keep walking." Footsteps pounded behind us. A hand grabbed Daniel's shoulder and whipped him around. I could smell the booze. Even before Daniel's mom left, I'd never seen his father much. If he was around, he'd joke with us in that awkward way grown-ups sometimes do with kids, a little too loud, trying a little too hard, and there'd be the smell of beer on his breath. Daniel would get embarrassed and herd us outside to play. We all knew something was wrong, but everyone's parents had a drink now and then, and everyone's parents did embarrassing things. So no one thought about it much until his mom took off, and we realized his dad wasn't like every other parent, and maybe he never had been. In the old days, his dad was always dressed up, shirt and tie, pressed pants, shiny shoes, dark hair slicked back, clean shaven, smelling faintly of cologne. Now, he still wore the shirt and slacks, but they were rumpled and stained, the shoes scuffed, his hair slick with oil, face covered in stubble. The only thing he smelled of was booze, so strong he seemed to have showered with it. I asked, "Where you're going? You tore the kitchen apart trying to cook dinner, and now you're going to leave me with the mess." "No," Daniel's voice was low and calm, like he was talking to a child. "I said I'd clean it before bed. Maya and I are going out for dinner." His dad blinked at me, like he hadn't seen me there. Then he scowled. No awkward joking for me these days. He didn't have much patience for any of Daniel's friends, but he seemed to like me the least, I suppose because I was the one Daniel stayed with when he needed to escape. "Maya," he said. "Can't stay away, can you? Always coming around, teasing the boy." Daniel's fingers wrapped around my elbow. "We're leaving, Dad. There's a casserole in the..." "You like teasing, don't you, Maya?" His dad stepped closer as Daniel pulled me back. "Just like all the girls. Tease and flirt and keep the boys running after you, spending their money building a climbing wall for you. Maybe get a kiss on the cheek for it. Holding out to see if he makes something of himself, because that's what counts for you girls. Is he going to be a hotshot lawyer? Olympic wrestler? Or just a lowly public defender? Or washed-up gym teacher? That's enough." Daniel eased me behind him, while casting glances at the surrounding houses. He wanted to get out of there, but he didn't want to make a scene. "I'll be back." "Of course you'll be back. Got nowhere else to go. You're a parasite, boy. Just like your little not-yet girlfriend here. She's waiting to see what you'll make of yourself first, so she can live off you. That's what all women want. Find a good man. A stupid man who'll keep paying the bills even when she brings home a brat that doesn't look anything like you. She'll tell you he's yours, and you'll believe her until one day she finds someone else, and off she goes, leaving you to raise the bastard brat. See if they'll give you another job in the company, Daniel said. Leave me here and go. His father laughed. You think they'll allow that? I'm trapped here, looking after a freak who isn't even my son. And wishes to God that was true, Daniel muttered. His dad swung. Daniel caught his arm and yanked it behind his back, spinning his dad around. If you don't think I'm yours, test it, he said. You've got access to everything you need. But you won't, will you? You know I'm your son. You just like to torment me. You think that's getting back at her somehow. Well, it isn't. He wrenched his father's arm up until his eyes bulged. I'm tired of it. Daniel thrust him out of the way. They faced off. It didn't last long before his dad spun and walked away, spitting curses. I'm sorry, Daniel murmured to me. He's just drunk. And angry and bitter, and taking it out on you. I looked up at him. Come stay with us. He nodded. Yeah, I'd better not go home tonight. I mean for good. It's only another couple of years, until I can escape to university like my brothers. Can they help? I'm sure there's something. No. They're gone and happy to be gone. When they come home, they see things are worse and just pat me on the back and tell me to hang in there. Will you think about it? Staying with us full time? Please? We've got the room, and my parents have always said you're welcome for as long as you want. I'll think about it. As we walked, I knew I wouldn't be telling him what Rafe had said tonight. He had too much else on his mind. It could wait. Let me work it out for myself first. We reached the Blender, a soda shop owned by the Morrises. It looks like something out of the 50s, and sells burgers and ice cream. There's even a jukebox in the corner. We walked in as Mayor Tilson and his wife were walking out, Nicole dawdling behind them, Sam even farther back. Maya. Daniel. The mayor gave us an election poster smile and thumped Daniel on the back. Practicing for regionals? Good to see it. He winked. Even if you could already win it with one hand tied behind your back. Mrs. Tilson rolled her eyes, murmuring, "Leave the kids alone, Phil," and smiling as she prodded him past us. Nicole frowned at me as her parents left. Daniel said you were eating at Rafe's. It didn't work out. Nicole, her mom called. Dad has a town meeting tonight. What's this with you and Rafe? Sam said as she walked up. Nothing. I turned to Nicole. I'll talk to you later. Tonight, she said. Call, okay. I'll try. She looked hurt by that, so I said I would call. She left, Sam trailing after her, casting glances back at us, like she was trying to figure out what was up. When we sat, Daniel said, "Do you want to talk about it?" "No, I want to talk about our plans for tonight." While we ate, we quietly made a list of things to look for. As we left the Blender, Dr. Hajek drove by. She honked and waved. Then Chief Carling passed and did the same. "Looks like the whole council is going to that meeting," Daniel said. "Aren't they usually the last Tuesday of the month?" I nodded. My dad went if there was anything on the agenda about the park. So why call a special? He stopped walking. "Mina Lee," I said. "They're meeting to discuss her death. Guess we have a stop to make." 29. The town council met at the school. That meant we knew exactly how to sneak in. There was a window in the guy's locker room that never closed right. Well, it didn't after grade 8, when Corey and Brendan broke in to set up a video camera in the girls' locker room. No videos were ever taken. Daniel had caught them and said if the camera wasn't gone by Monday morning, he'd give us photos from the last time they went skinny dipping, when the lake had been really cold and, well, the photos wouldn't have been flattering. Corey had busted the window frame trying to get in to set up the camera. Daniel had fixed it, but only good enough so the damage wasn't obvious from the outside. Now we all had an after-hours entrance. The hardest part about getting in was waiting for a break in the traffic flowing into the parking lot. A 7 o'clock town council meeting in Salmon Creek means come by when you're done with dinner, so at 7:30, cars were still driving into the lot right beside the broken window. As we watched from the bushes, a minivan pulled in, headlights illuminating the far side of the lot, where one lone vehicle sat apart from the rest. My dad's Jeep. Seeing that made my heart give an extra thump. Even if I thought the town was involved in Mina's death, which I didn't, I knew my dad had nothing to do with it. But why was he here? If the meeting was about dealing with the cougar problem, they didn't need the whole council for that. Finally, Daniel boosted me through, then vaulted in himself. We stepped out of the locker room into the pitch-black hall. "Lead the way," Daniel said. After taking a moment for my eyes to adjust, I led him to the classrooms at the end. "Hear anything?" he whispered. I nodded. "Do you?" He shook his head. He didn't question why I could and he couldn't. That's the way it has always been, like me being able to see better in the dark. Serena used to say it was because I lived in the middle of freaking nowhere, so I was used to the silence and the dark. Only now I knew that wasn't the reason at all. Improved night vision. Improved sense of smell and hearing. Improved agility. Improved stealth. Signs that something more than human blood flowed in my veins. Signs that I was. I shivered and Daniel rubbed my shoulder. "We can turn back if you're not sure about this." "I'm fine. We'll need to get closer. I'm just hearing voices, not any words." I crept along the hall. When Daniel's shoes squeaked behind me, I winced. No one came racing from the meeting room, though. They were deep in a heated discussion. I led Daniel into the intermediary grades classroom. It was beside the meeting room and there was a vent joining the two. When we'd been in that class, Serena and I had figured out that if I took a seat at the back, I could hear who was getting in trouble. That's a lot less useful than it sounds at our school. There was never anything interesting going on or anyone getting in trouble who we didn't already know was in trouble. Daniel moved a desk under the vent. He motioned me up, but I whispered that I could hear fine where I was. We'd only needed to listen for a minute before realizing there was another reason why the town would call an emergency meeting tonight, one that had nothing to do with Mina Lee, but that explained why my dad had to be there. "Okay," Dad was saying. "So far, the fires are all to the west and the wind is blowing in the same direction, meaning we aren't in its path." "Yet," Chief Carling said. "Exactly. At this point, the fires are under control, but we all know that can change. So can the wind direction. We've been lucky enough to have wet autumns for the last 5 years. That means, though, that our evacuation plan is designed to deal with children, and, as we all know, teenagers are a bit tougher to manage. Like herding cats," Mayor Tilson said. "Annabelle's thinking we might need to slip a GPS in Sam's running shoes, just so we can find her if we need to evacuate. And we now have Raphael and his sister," Dr. Hajek said. "We may want to consider offering them a place in town until the threat passes. At the very least, we need to get them cell phones." The others agreed, and so the conversation went plans for a potential evacuation. All very important. And very dull. I motioned to Daniel that we should leave, but he shook his head. After a half-hour more of evacuation strategy, Mayor Tilson said, "And now, as long as we're all here, I've asked Dr. Inglis and Chief Carling for an update on our recent tragedy." Daniel nodded in satisfaction. Chief Carling spoke first. The young woman's name, as most of you know, was Mina Lee. Or that's the name on her ID, which appears to be fake, as we discovered when we tried to notify next of kin. That would seem to confirm our suspicion that she was a corporate spy. I have her description out to my contacts, and with any luck, we'll find out her real name so we can notify her family. Her death hasn't been ruled a homicide, so my main priority is identifying the victim. But I have, of course, started a case file, should the situation change. And, at this point, I don't think it will, Dr. Inglis said. Cause of death was exsanguination. Fatal loss of blood. The damage to the throat tissue makes it impossible to determine whether it was homicide, misadventure, or predation. For now, I'm going to say it was most likely predation, given the rising number of cougar encounters and the obvious signs of feeding. When we find the young woman's family, if they want to get a second opinion, we can do that. Everyone agreed this was fair. My dad excused himself to get home and resume tracking the fires. After he left, they continued talking about the murder, but only boring stuff like moving the body to cold storage at the medical lab. Daniel agreed we could leave now. Time to check out the Braun place. We parked down an old logging road, then walked back, sticking to the woods. We got the spare key from the shed and went inside. The cottage had already been searched. It wasn't a rip the place apart kind of search, just kitchen and dresser drawers opened and stuff inside left piled on top, like Chief Carling had been looking for anything that might help her find Mina Lee's family. We'd hoped to find a laptop, but there was no sign of one. While Daniel searched more thoroughly, I checked caller ID on the landline. It said she'd had 5 calls since yesterday, presumably all after her death. 3 came from unlisted numbers. The other 2 had the same number attached with an area code I didn't recognize. I wrote it down. Then I played her messages. There was only one, and it must have come in after Chief Carling searched the place, because no one had listened to it yet. "Hey, it's me." The voice was male. "You did get my text messages, right? The Nasts paid me a visit. They're starting to think we're holding out on them, that we found something and we're seeing if the Cortezes will pay more. I told them we aren't stupid enough to try that." A pause. "We aren't, right? Double-cross a cabal and we'll be paying the price into the afterlife." Another pause. "You know that, right?" The man swore. "I can't believe you'd ever be that stupid, but if I don't hear back from you soon, I'm bolting and taking everything we have so far with me." Daniel walked in, frowning as the message finished. "When did that come in?" "Tonight. If anyone else left messages, someone erased them. This one's from the only number on caller ID." I lifted a scrap of paper. I wrote it down. "Can you play it again? I missed the beginning." "Someone drove by on a dirt bike and drowned it out." "I did." As he listened, his frown grew. "Could be corporate espionage," he said. "A drug company wants to buy stolen research. Sounds like that guy's really afraid of them, though. I imagine it'd be a shady company, if they're willing to buy that information. Maybe that's what cabal means. Industry slang." "It doesn't explain what she wanted with us," I said. How would cozying up to local teens help? I don't know. He walked over to the desk and started moving stuff around, looking under the phone and the answering machine, searching drawers. I kept thinking about the message. We'll be paying the price into the afterlife. It was probably just an exaggerated phrase, like saying kick our asses into the next century. But put it together with that book on witches and the stuff on skinwalkers and it just... Daniel, I said. He bent to run his hand under a drawer. When I didn't continue, he straightened. What's up? I found out something today, and it's going to sound crazy. The back door clicked. I waved Daniel to silence and mouthed, "Someone's here." He opened the folding door to the closet. I hesitated. Even thinking about being in such a small place made my skin crawl. I glanced at the window instead, but he shook his head. No time for that. The closet was even smaller than it looked. Daniel went in first and I had to back in. To get the door closed, he had to put his arm around my waist and pull me against him. "Just relax," he said, his breath hot against my ear. His hand slid to rest against my hip. He stayed bent over my shoulder, as if trying to see through the slats in the door, his breath ruffling my hair. When I shifted, he put his other hand on my other hip. I shifted again. "Stop squirming," he said. I didn't wear my steel-toed boots. I stepped off his foot. "Sorry. I know you hate small places. Just close your eyes and relax." I did and focused on the light footsteps. "Chief Carling?" Drawers opened and shut. Papers rustled. The intruder finished in the living room and went into the bedroom. More searching. Now Daniel was the one getting restless, fidgeting and shifting. When I tried to pull away to give him room, he jumped like I'd startled him, then murmured, "Just relax," like I'd been the one fussing. Finally, the intruder came into the study. Through the slats, I could make out only a dark figure, but I picked up a faint smell of. A day ago, I'd have told myself I was smelling perfume or hair gel or fabric softener, something that would identify a person. Now I realized I was smelling the person's scent. I leaned forward. Daniel tried to stop me, but I waved him off. I bent, putting my face to the slats. It was a far from perfect peephole, but I could see enough to confirm my guess. I pushed open the folding door and stepped out. "What are you doing here?" Sam spun. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What am I doing here?" I'm not the one hiding, in her gaze lifted over my shoulder. "Daniel." She looked from me to him. I realized I was in a notorious make-out spot with Daniel. "We're not." "What are you looking for, Sam?" he said, stepping toward her. "Looking for? And nothing." "You were really interested in Mina Lee," I said. "You thought she was here because of you." "What? No. Why are you going through her things?" "None of your business." She brushed past me. As she walked away, I saw papers sticking out of her rear pocket. I snatched them. She yelped and spun, swiping at me as I backed out of reach. "That's mine," she said. "No, it's not." I held the papers up for Daniel to see. "Recognize the handwriting?" He nodded. "It's Ms. Lee's." "You don't know that." Sam lunged to grab them, but I backed up again. "She left a note for Daniel," I said. "That's her handwriting." Sam went still. "A note about what?" I scanned the first page. "Not about you." "This one is, though." "Background notes." "Where you're from." What happened to your? I looked up at her. Your parents didn't die in a car accident. They were. Give those back, she said, advancing on me. Your parents were murdered, I said. Why does everyone think? She hit me. A right hook to the jaw. I flew off my feet. Daniel knocked her out of the way before she could hit me again. She grabbed the pages and took off. Daniel started to go after her, then saw me and ran back, grabbing tissue. I tasted blood. As I winced, blood gushed from a split lip. Daniel pressed the tissues to my mouth. He moved me back to sit on the edge of the desk. Hold that. I'm going to find some ice. I shook my head. Sam. Those pages. The roar of a dirt bike stopped me. I tried to get up, but he tugged me back onto the desk. She's gone, he said. We need to stop the bleeding and get some ice on that. He paused. Are your teeth? I ran my tongue over them, ignoring the sharp tang of blood. Present and accounted for. Good. Hold on then. 30. IDID hold on to the tissues. I didn't stay put, though. With my free hand, I mopped up drops of blood from the hardwood floor. If this turned into a murder investigation, I definitely didn't want my blood found in the victim's house. When Daniel came back, he had some ice wrapped in a dishcloth. As he exchanged it for the tissues, he said, I can't believe she did that. I mean, Sam is way too fast with her fists, but to deck you? Over her papers. I'd been thinking the same thing. I felt weirdly hurt, and not because my jaw ached. I always thought Sam and I got along okay. In the last few days, she'd even been friendly. Now I realized that was only because she thought I might have more information on Mina Lee. I told Daniel that, then said, I'm still shocked that she hit me. I know she took a swing at Rafe's sister. I stopped, realizing what I was saying, then continued. She's brain damaged. That's why he's away from school a lot. Looking after her. Daniel wadded up the bloodied tissues inside clean ones, then stuffed them into his pocket. I hadn't heard that. No one knows. And no one can know. She's his guardian, and if people find out, they won't from me. You know that. He leaned beside me, against the desk. So, what happened? Sam didn't realize Rafe's sister was brain damaged and lashed out when she provoked her. Not unless being extremely friendly can be considered provocation. Daniel shook his head. The girl's definitely got some loose wiring, and it seems to be getting looser. He glanced at me. Steer clear, okay. I intend to. So those sheets said her parents had been murdered? What else? That was as far as I got. Her parents were killed in a home invasion, and it said Sam survived, which must mean she was there. I guess that might explain some of the loose wiring. And why the Tilsons told everyone her parents died in a car accident. Less traumatic. I nodded. Made sense. Why had Sam still been determined to get those papers before I read more? What else was in there? Bleeding stopped, I said, taking the makeshift ice pack. We should keep looking around. Sam found something. Maybe we can, too. We discovered where Sam had found the pages under the mattress in the main bedroom. We hadn't looked there earlier, and we wouldn't have now if we hadn't noticed the bed covers were wrinkled. Under the mattress was a file containing background info on every kid in our class. Parents' names, date of birth, hobbies. Mina had put a lot of emphasis on hobbies, underlining some of them, like wrestling, boxing, and law for Daniel. The emphasis on sports and extracurricular interests would make sense, if you were filling out applications for a dating service. Why would a corporate spy care what local teens like to do in their spare time? It's a cover, Daniel said. If anyone gets close, she can pull out these, and the hobbies and stuff make it seem like she really is doing a general interest story. He flipped through the pages. She's got everyone here. Even Rafe, though his is filled with question marks and notes for follow-up. Seems she wasn't having much luck getting background on him. Weird. I kept my gaze on the pages, so he wouldn't see that I knew it wasn't weird at all. Where's my page? Right, he flipped through again. Hey. Seems someone is missing. Me. He didn't answer until he'd laid out all the sheets on the bed, in alphabetical order. Everyone was there except Sam and me. I bet she grabbed yours, too, Daniel said. Sam, I mean. They weren't in any kind of order, and she had a bunch of pages. Yours was probably behind hers. He folded the sheets and stuck them in the backpack we'd brought. Let's keep looking. We didn't find anything else. When we were done, I went back into the study to make sure we'd left it the way we found it. We should double-check that number you wrote down. Daniel clicked through the recall list. Hey, it tracks calls out, too. The last 5. Grab those. I handed him a pen. He started writing down numbers, then stopped and stared down at the display. Daniel. I peered over at the number. It's my mom's cell. He blinked and pulled his gaze away. Or it was. Dad got it from the lab files, and he used to call it when he was drunk. She changed it a few months ago. I didn't ask how he recognized the number. I could picture him, writing it down from redial, then sitting in his room, phone in hand, preparing for a call he'd never make. Daniel didn't get emails from his mother. Didn't get calls. Didn't even get birthday cards. I don't think he ever got an explanation either. She just left. I don't know how anyone could do that to a kid, but I especially don't know how anyone could do it to Daniel. We used to joke that he was so good he made the rest of us look like brats. I'm sure he wondered what he'd done to make her leave and not look back. I think that about my birth mother, who'd never had a chance to know me, so he must think it about his mom. You okay? I said. Course. He shrugged it off as he put the phone back. But I'm wondering how Mina Lee got that number, and more important, why she'd be calling it. At least twice. Because, other than Serena's parents, your mom is the only employee who ever left Salmon Creek. Serena's parents still work for the St. Clouds. Your mother doesn't. Which might make her more willing to talk about problems. And if there were problems, she might know. Dr. Bianchi had been a chemist at the lab. We could check her old computer. My dad's probably passed out by now. Let's do that. Daniel's father wasn't passed out. We could tell that as soon as we rounded the corner and heard the TV blaring through the open kitchen window. But he was too engrossed in his TV show to notice us as we sneaked inside. Daniel waved me to his mom's study while he closed the window. The neighbors never complained about the noise, but it embarrassed him anyway. His mom's office looked exactly the way it had when she'd taken off. Although the company had left her desktop computer for Daniel, his dad wouldn't let him use the office, making him do his homework at the kitchen table. I slipped in, waited for Daniel, then closed the door behind him. He turned on the computer. He knew her password, she'd given it to him once when his laptop was acting wonky. It was 19CURIE11, after the scientist Marie Curie's 1911 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. That password said a lot about Dr. Bianchi and what mattered in her life. "We probably won't find anything," Daniel said as he logged on. "I know she had to do all her work on the company network and save the files on their servers. They shut that connection down after she left. I'm hoping she saved something to the hard drive, though. Dad told them he wiped it so I could use it, but since I never got to, I don't think he bothered. He doesn't come in here." Someone had cleared the hard drive, just not very well. Whether it was his mother before she left, quickly deleting files, or his dad doing a cursory wipe in case the St. Cloud's checked, I don't know. The documents and email folders had been emptied, but not wiped from the trash. Most of what was in it was garbage. Family schedules, shopping lists, personal emails to college friends and colleagues. Then an email from a colleague that wasn't personal. It was a chain of messages that ended shortly before she left. The last one told Dr. Bianchi to do what she wanted with the information, just make sure she printed the correspondence, then deleted it. Daniel scrolled down to the previous message. "Perfect," his mother had written. "They won't try to hold me to my contract now." Beneath that, her correspondent had written, "Fine, here's the list." "Good enough?" "It better be. Don't ask me for anything else. We're even now." A list of names followed. Under that was the beginning of the email chain. "I need more, Mike. You owe me. Telling them I know the experiment went wrong won't help. I need proof. Give me the names of the failed subjects. They screwed up in Buffalo and I'm not sticking around until the same thing happens here." I reread the emails in sequential order, figuring it out aloud as I did. "Your mom discovered that the St. Clouds were hiding a failed project in Buffalo, where Dr. Davidoff works. Whatever research they're doing here, she expected the same thing to happen, and she wanted out before it blew up in their faces. She blackmailed them with the details in order to get out of her contract. Ever since Mrs. Bianchi left, people in Salmon Creek had whispered about how she broke her contract. The most popular theory was that her husband had been abusing her. Wouldn't it have made more sense to get rid of him, though? He was in the business office, she was the valuable scientist. We searched for the earlier emails, where she'd gotten the details about the failed study. They were gone. She must have been careful about permanently erasing them but got careless with the last messages, eager to leave." Daniel scrolled the email back to the list of names. "Project Genesis," he said. "Have you ever heard of it?" "No," I stopped and stared at a name on the list. "Elizabeth Delaney." Daniel frowned. "Is that a relative?" "Not that I know of." "Well, no one in your family works for the St. Clouds, so it must be a coincidence. Common enough last name, isn't it?" I nodded. "Make a note of it, then. We should write down all." A crash made us both jump. "Daniel!" His dad called from the kitchen. "You here, Danny? I need some help." Daniel let out a puff of breath. The nickname and the plaintive tone told him his dad was at the far end of a drinking bout, past the anger. "Danny!" Footsteps approached the study. Daniel swore as we realized the light was on. He motioned me back, then opened the door and slid out. I took out my house keys and plugged my keychain thumb drive into his mother's computer. "Hey, Dad! Did you drop a plate? Let me clean that." "What were you doing in your mother's office?" "Looking for a stapler. You know I don't like you in there." An edge seeped into Mr. Bianchi's voice. "It's okay, Dad. Everything's all right." "I don't Daniel's voice took on the same tone that had convinced the old woman to tell us what Yinald Lucia meant. Everything's all right. You can go lie down. I've got it under control. I turned off the computer, then peered through the door crack. Daniel stood eye to eye with his father. Mr. Bianchi shifted uneasily, like he was trying to break eye contact but couldn't. Just go watch TV, Dad. Everything's all right. Mr. Bianchi nodded, then shuffled back into the living room. Daniel waited until he was gone before coming back to me. I picked up the thumb drive. He nodded and kicked me out. Shut one up, I said. Thank God for your amazing powers of persuasion. Yes, if they only acted when he was really angry. And really angry. Still, you need to teach me how to do that sometime, so I can use it on my dad, get whatever I want. Like you don't already. Maybe. But I'm always looking for ways to fine-tune the process. He shook his head and waved me to the truck. An unintentional side effect from Serena's medication must have killed her. We were almost certain of that now. The St. Clouds were already covering up the failure of this Project Genesis, and they didn't dare admit that they were responsible for Serena, too. It didn't matter if it'd been a freak side effect and they honestly thought the drugs were safe. They had to cover it up. So what had happened when Mina Lee came snooping around? Did she find something and confront them? Did they kill her? The problem with that theory was the they. Who killed her? Chief Carling? Mayor Tilson? Dr. Inglis? No way. Daniel agreed. His theory was that the St. Clouds had sent someone to murder her and no one in town was involved. I was good with the no one in town part, but the other half of the explanation seemed a little Hollywood to me. Hired assassins in Salmon Creek? This wasn't New York or even Vancouver. You couldn't just sneak in here unnoticed. The bounty hunter who'd come after Rafe had barely made it to town, but I bet people were already talking about him, wondering who he'd been, what he wanted with Rafe. I hadn't thought of that. People would have noticed him. He'd spoken to someone who knew me. There would be questions. We needed. No, Rafe could handle that. My problem right now was Serena, or that was the problem I was focusing on, to keep from thinking of Rafe and Annie and Skinwalker's end. Serena. We thought we knew how she died. So what would we do about it? I suppose the obvious answer would be expose the failed research to the world and bring down the St. Clouds. Or that would be the obvious answer if we thought they were mad scientists about to unleash unsafe drugs on the world. But they weren't. They were the people who gave us a great life and took care of us, and if they were responsible for Serena's death, we couldn't ignore that, but nor could we do anything drastic until we were sure it hadn't been a freak accident that they'd learned from. We needed to know more. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.